Welcome to the ultimate crowdsourced personal finance show. This is your Friday Roundup.
You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
Hello and welcome to the Choose FI Radio podcast. For those of you that are checking us out for the first time, this is a twice-a-week show on Mondays and Fridays. On Mondays, we introduce a new concept or guest, typically that is related to financial independence or personal finance. And then on Fridays, which is the episode that you're listening to today, we take some extra time to really dig into that content and give you our feedback, bring in thoughts and ideas from our community, which allows us to capture the ideas that we might have missed on the first pass and also bring in your feedback as well. So it's a crowdsourced show. So to help me with this today, I have my co-host Brad here with me in the studio. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing really well, Jonathan. Yeah, this is, it's been a good week here in the household. Yeah, I actually had a couple kind of neat things in my little FI world happen. My youngest daughter just started kindergarten and they have this neat little thing called Mystery Reader. So it's basically like one of the parents every Tuesday comes into the class and reads to the class, but the kids have no idea whatsoever, like which parent is coming in, hence the mystery part of it. And you should have seen the look on my daughter Molly's face when she saw me walk into that classroom. It was one of those amazing moments. Your heart just like melts. It was really, really cool. And I just love getting the opportunity to do that. And, you know, it's neat because I am here at home. I told the teacher, I'm like, I would do this every single day if you let me. So whenever you need somebody, like if somebody cancels, just give me a call. I'll be there in 5 minutes. So it was just like a neat thing, you know?
That's so cool. What book did you read?
I read a bunch of books. I read Giraffes Can't Dance, which is a neat one.
What? I just read that book to my son yesterday.
Nice.
I don't know if he understood all the words at 6 months old, but yeah, that's what we read.
Yeah, the kindergartners love it. So yeah, that's a book that you'll be reading for many, many years now.
That is awesome, man. Yeah, it's going to be funny. Like a couple years from now, the teacher's going to be saying, does anybody else other than Brad Barrett want to come in and read a book? Anybody.
Yes. No, I totally hear you. But yeah, I don't know. I just love it. It's fun. So yeah, so that was neat. And then we actually went on a hike this past Saturday. So we're trying to kind of go outside of our comfort zone a little bit as a family. Like instead of just like hanging around the house or doing something locally, we just grabbed this book from the library called The Best Hikes to Waterfalls in the State of Virginia. And it's just like this random neat little book. So basically now like we have this 2-hour radius that we're willing to drive like on a Saturday or Sunday. And yeah, we found one to this Natural Bridge State Park. Jonathan, have you ever been to Natural Bridge?
I have driven by it. I believe there is a fee to actually go there, right?
There is, yeah. So it is a state park now. But man, it was just one of these 7 wonders of the world type things. Like we didn't know what to expect. Like you've seen it on, you know, anybody who hasn't heard of the Natural Bridge, just kind of Google it. It looks neat. You know, it's like, okay, here's this bridge made out of rock. But like when you're there, it is just mind blowing. And really, you can see why for a long time it was considered one of the wonders of the world. And the funny kind of FI aspect of this and why I'm telling this story is that there was a little sign, like an informational sign saying that actually Thomas Jefferson purchased this back in the 1700s and he bought it for, I think it was 20 shillings, which they said in parenthetically $2.40. Okay. So my daughter, Anna, like you should have seen like her eyes bugged out of her skull. Like she's like $2.40. We paid $22 as a family to get in here. Like, how is that possible? And, you know, I'm telling her it would probably be worth, I mean, that state park, he bought 173 acres with this basically world-renowned natural bridge. It's probably $1 billion today, you know? And so trying to explain to her that concept, it was kind of one of those neat like learning lessons that we didn't anticipate when we set out to go on a random hike that day, you know?
It is definitely the second generation fire conversations that get me more excited than anything else. The more we talk about them, I mean, these little light bulb moments that you have with your daughters are just totally priceless, and to be able to capture them and then kind of build on them is really something that I latch on to both as a host, but also as a listener.
Nice. Yeah, it's cool. And I hope it's adding some value to people out there. We're not like trying to stuff this down our girls' throats by any means. It's just like these topics come up in conversation, and it's fascinating to see how interested they are. And I think we've laid the groundwork for that, certainly over months and years, just kind of talking about money, but like in a very positive and constructive way, and saving money and, the value of compounding and with things we're trying to teach them. And when it does come up organically like this, it really is fun. And that was a goal. And that was difficult to explain, like how $2.40 turns into $1 billion. And that's just me guessing about the billion, but I would have to imagine it's somewhere in that vicinity.
Wow. The other half of that is this idea of exploring your state. I think there's so many of us that think that, one of these days, once I'm on the other side, then I'm going to get a chance to explore the world, or I'm going to get a chance to explore the country. And how many of us haven't even checked out our city, much less our state? And one of these there are so many resources out there, similar to the book that you purchased, that will help you learn all the really cool things that are available to do in the particular geographic region that you're in. And what if you just took that on as a challenge? And how much more interesting is that than binge watching the latest show of some TV show on Netflix?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's just like we kind of talk about here fairly often, which is just thinking a little bit differently and stepping outside your comfort zone. It's easy for us to kind of lie around the house and play board games and do fun stuff, like that's not insignificant. But we've kind of taken it up as this challenge to, all right, we have resources, we have time, we can do fun things like this. Let's take a trip once a month even, and just do some kind of family hike and explore some new area. It's really, that was the farthest we went, and that was about 2 hours. And it was really not a bad day trip. We left at 8 a.m. and got back before dinner time, and it was just a lovely day.
So this past Monday, we had the episode with Fritz from Retirement Manifesto talking about the idea of a drawdown strategy. And that episode was a very valuable conversation. And hopefully this roundup will add something to that conversation as well, because while in the FI community, we spend most of our time talking about how to accumulate this nest egg, or what we have called this perpetual money-making machine. At some point in time, you get to the place where now you're not talking about wealth accumulation, but wealth preservation, or maybe even decumulation, depending on your perspective. And how you tackle drawing down on that nest egg is a crucial part of the equation that I think a lot of us have just had a blind spot to.
Yeah, I agree. This was one of my favorite episodes. I listened to it, I think, 4 times since we recorded it. And I took more notes on this episode with Fritz than any other episode to date. So yeah, I think this should be a really interesting conversation, Jonathan. And let's kind of kick it off.
And let's start by reading some feedback that we got from Frank. And Frank listened to this episode and he said, "You don't have to take more risks than you have to take. Learn it, know it, love it." And I think what really came through in this episode was this idea of balance. Brad and I have harped on this idea that a controlled degree of risk is important. It's important not to just leave money on the table. And it's important to realize that if you have a net worth of $1 million, it's not good enough to just put that in a coffee can or put that into a bank account where it's not earning any interest, or it's earning an extraordinarily minute amount of interest, like 0.1% or 0.25%. That's not good enough, because the value of your money is slowly eroding over time to inflation. So your dollar becomes worth less. And so that's kind of the premise for how we try to set up our investment strategy. We need to have investments that at least match inflation or hopefully exceed inflation and have some margin built in there for growth. And for those of you that are tuning in for the first time, this isn't the episode where we talk about how to go about investing. We certainly have plenty of episodes to discuss that already. In particular, I'm thinking about the 2 episodes, I believe it's 19 and 34 with JL Collins, and the 2 roundups that are associated with each of those episodes. But there is another side to that, at which point you really have enough. You have made it, and you don't have to take more risk than you need to. And I think that's what came through with Fritz. He had been making the right choices for a long enough period of time that he had far exceeded the 4% withdrawal rule. In fact, you could tell, what I came away with is probably realistically, he could use like a 2.8 or a 3.2% withdrawal rule, and he's still going to have more than enough to take care of his family. And so he was willing to go ahead and use a much more conservative asset allocation. I believe he said 60% bonds, 40% equities, because even though he knows that's going to reduce his returns, and even though he knows he's going to have a pension coming in down the road and probably doesn't need to be that conservative, he doesn't need more than that. He's going to be okay either way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that is a very important kind of larger point. And it's interesting because that is something that I jotted down in my notes, which was about this balance, right? And also Fritz's exact plan. Like to your point, Jonathan, I suspect his safe withdrawal rate is much less than 3% even, especially with the pension, with potentially Medicare coming up in only 10 years away, and the fact that he's been diligently saving for 32 years in a career. I would have to imagine he has safety baked into this more times than just about anybody in the early retiree world. But whereas some people might look at that and say, oh, wow, he could have pulled the trigger years before on his early retirement. This was his plan. And I think that came through to me in this episode. And I don't mean this in a negative way at all, but like Fritz has what he has in mind and he's rolling with that. Like he has his plan and that works for him. And that lets him sleep at night. And that's what he's going with. So whereas I think Fritz clearly is very open-minded, very intelligent in obviously so many ways. Like I'm not sure that I could convince him that quote unquote my way is right here, as opposed to him putting off his retirement date till 55, where, I think there's a legitimate difference of opinion potentially. And I tried to ask that early in the episode about if he had found Phi earlier, would he have, in all likelihood, have retired earlier? And he said, we wanted to balance that and enjoy today. And he thinks that they would have followed that balanced approach of taking these family vacations and doing all these other things that he kind of alluded to there. And I'm not sure in my mind's eye that that's the choice that I would have made, because I think it was almost like setting up this straw man in that like people pursuing Phi are not living a balanced life. So like, whereas, and this again is always personal, right? There are some people who are living a life of deprivation pursuing Phi, and that's their plan, which is perfectly fine. Like I think mine is the balanced plan, which is we're still living life. We're going out to restaurants. We're going to breweries. We're taking these trips to family trips. This weekend trip costs a decent amount of money when you throw in gas and the amount that we spent to get into the place. And my kids even suckered me into, they got souvenirs. So they paid for it with their own money, which is actually part of like our whole plan of giving them an allowance and giving them like a savings bucket, a spending, and a charity bucket. So theoretically, they're supposed to be able to spend their spending money how they want. But Jonathan, I got to tell you, it killed me that they bought this nonsense. It really killed me.
I've been waiting for the period on the end of that sentence so I can make fun of you, even though I know I'm headed there and I'm probably the bar is much lower for me to buy into that stuff. I cannot believe that the Barrett family got souvenirs. You guys are human after all.
No, we are. And my older daughter, Anna, she insists on buying, like, they sell these like bags of rocks, or like they're basically like gems, they call them, where you can like grab a bag full of gems for $8 or something. And I'm thinking to myself, like, this is absolutely worthless, but she just loves these gems. So I don't know. Everywhere she goes, when we go to the Science Museum, she buys them. She bought them here at Natural Bridge. It was like enough rocks already, but I guess it's her money and I have to let her make decisions,
Well, the good news is you have space for it up in your attic now that you and Molly have been throwing away all your other junk.
That is very, very true. Very true. But yeah, getting back to the whole balance thing, and I hope I'm being clear here, is that I think a balanced approach is correct. And I agreed with Fritz entirely. And I think it just comes down to personal preference. Whereas for me, pursuing Phi from someone just starting out, right? Like with a high savings rate at 22 years old, if you can reach Phi in 15 years, at 37, and be able to have that some flexibility, like we've talked about with Joel from Phi 180, where, okay, if you needed to work a couple more days or a couple days a year in the rest of your life, it's not this horrific thing. Whereas, Fritz wanted absolute safety and he was willing to work till 55 to do that. That's not a decision that I'm willing to make. And I'd rather those years for me in post-Phi, but for Fritz, that clearly was a decision that he thought through. And that's the takeaway for the audience. There is no right answer. Okay, this is not me saying Fritz did something wrong, or Fritz telling me that he thinks I'm being irresponsible for retiring early when I don't have 100% safety. That's not the issue. It's we have each thought through what we value in our lives, and that is the key. And we've made the decisions based on those values.
Yeah, I'm glad we brought Fritz on because I think he actually reflects a larger percentage of our audience than either of us, our own personal biases would allow us to see. And that is that many people are taking a traditional path, but they want to take that traditional path in a smarter way, right?
Absolutely.
And the other key to that is this idea of optimization and what the math says would be optimal. And we've kind of hit on that word as almost something that we have rejected to some degree. It's something that we fight against because although we know what the math says, and many times we also realize that FI is inexorably tied to personal finance. And the part of personal finance that you really need to latch onto is that word personal. And what's right for you may not be right for me. Ultimately, it comes down to that value choice. And honestly, what I came away with from this episode with Fritz is that he is very happy with his choice, and which means that the decisions that he has made and is making right now are perfect for him. And what I love about it is now that he's taken probably hundreds of hours over the last 2 years to determine what his personal money philosophy is and then what the practical execution of that philosophy should be. He's written it down. He's put it out on his blog, and now he can walk away from it. He doesn't have to second guess it because you know what? Even if it's not optimal, it's going to work just fine. And him and his family are going to be totally fine.
Yeah. And that discussion of optimal versus non-optimal, that's something that we've actually, some people in our Facebook community have kind of called us out on in a very good-natured way. But I think it speaks to a larger point, and that's why I wanted to talk about it here, is that, Jonathan, you alternately say something like, it's all about the math. But then you say things like what you just said, which is it doesn't always have to be optimal, right? And sometimes it comes down to the personal side. Now, those sound like two irreconcilable points of view, right? Like it can't be all about the math, but then not all about the math. But I think on some levels it can be. Like we are cognizant of how important the math is and really how easy this is at its essence, right? You live below your means, you try to save as much as you can, you invest probably mostly in index funds, maybe if you feel like diversifying in real estate and other things. Those things we can kind of argue at the margins, but it's real easy, right? It's not rocket science to live below your means, save a lot of money and invest it. But then it comes down to the personal side, which is the psychological that we're always talking about. And each of us have different levels of safety and security that we need. We have different levels of risk, things that let us sleep at night is a phrase that we use here a lot. Those things matter, and those do impact the math sometimes. Because talking about just the simple one that we hear over and over and over again is paying down your mortgage, right? Like, quote unquote, everybody knows that the math suggests you should not pay down your mortgage if you have a low interest rate, which for the last decade or so, they've been 4% plus or minus a little bit, which is at or near historic lows. And you should invest that money in the stock market or wherever you see fit. And the math will let you ride off into the sunset with more money than you would have had you paid down the mortgage. But that said, psychologically, paying down that mortgage is fantastic. And a lot of people, that appeals to them. And I don't tell those people they're wrong. It's not my place to. And I frankly don't think they're wrong if that lets them sleep at night and that gets them to a place where they're comfortable with their FI choice. So this is very personal. And I really want to ram that home as often as possible. Like the math is the math and it's important, but you need to figure out what works for your life.
And Brad, I want to come back to that. I want to fine tune that even more. Like my line is, it's just math, right? And I think what I've latched onto as I've seen these questions pop up over and over in our community, when I try to take the high level view of what that decision actually looks like, the one thing that ties our entire community together, regardless of how we end up landing on each particular decision, is that we do start with the math, right? Ultimately, we do have this in common because we look at the math, whereas so many people in the world just make a decision based purely on emotion. In our community, because we understand how the math works and we understand that it is just math, we can start there. And then once you realize what the two different outcomes would be based on the math, then we add on these other things like value, like personal choice, like psychology. And then those augment that decision, and that turns into an equation that is something that is slightly more objective, and it allows us to make a decision and be more comfortable with it, even if we know it's not the most optimal choice. Take my case, for example. If I were to take a step back and reevaluate my own decision and made the choice to not pay off my student loans aggressively, and I had made the minimum payment on my student loans, and I put every extra dollar that I had into the stock market, I can look at that right now and say, okay, I would have been, by putting that into a pre-tax bucket, I would have been avoiding that 25% marginal tax bracket that I'm in. I would have been benefiting from the nearly 12% rate of returns year over year that we have seen over the last several years. I would have far exceeded my fixed rate of return of that 6% on my student loan. So when you start with the math and you say it's just math, I can objectively say that this was a suboptimal choice, right? But I was aware of that ahead of time. I started with that. And then I added in the personal factors. And the personal factors said, as long as I have a $2,000 a month student loan payment, I am tied to this job. I am tied to this career, and I'm tied to the hamster wheel. It is much more difficult for me to make creative choices and have the freedom to fail if I have to make sure that I can make this $1,500 to $2,000 a month payment. And my family is tied to that decision as well. So once you go through this process of discovering what the math says is the most optimal choice, then you get to take the opportunity to add back in those personal factors. And even though I am cognizant of the fact that I left money on the table and you could quantify that, and it's probably somewhere in between $40,000 to $60,000, I have no regrets about the choice I made because it's given me the freedom to pursue this life choice. And ultimately, it's just math, has to be weighed in the context of it's your life.
Yeah, and that is perfectly legitimate, Jonathan. That is the perfect end cap to what we're saying here, which is you made a decision. Some other people might listen to you and say, oh, he made the wrong decision. Well, okay, that's fine. They can think what they want. But for you, that was the right decision. So it's important to start with the math and then think through what works for your life. I think that's a perfect way to look at it.
So we got a lot of feedback on this episode. Stacy said, love the timely message on drawdown strategies by Fritz. I am excited to dig into his blog in more detail since it really hits our season of life. And that really doesn't have to tie to age. That can just be tied to where you are on your FI journey. If you're at the point where you're within this 5-year window that you're going to be drawing down on your portfolio, this is something you need to think about, and then just taking the time to document it and plan it out. We talk about this idea of decision fatigue. Well, if you do it now, you're doing it from a very unemotional, objective place. If you do it when you're experiencing a market crash, you're going to be in a very stressful and emotional place, which probably will lend itself to making poor or irrational decisions. So getting a plan in place that you follow is exactly what we want this conversation to be about. So Danny in our Facebook group said, thanks for this great episode. I am living in drawdown. Here's what's on my mind. Maybe it's a bit unorganized. And Danny highlighted several points, which we're going to take a few of and discuss today, and hopefully be able to draw on some of Brad's feedback, mine, and Fritz and Big Earns as well, who participated in this conversation. You ready for this, Brad?
Yeah, let's do it. And just to be clear, this was on our Facebook group. So choosefi.com/Facebook to gain access to it. And yeah, we had both Big Earn and Fritz just responding to Danny's 8 points here. It was 21 different replies, which is just such a neat thing that we talk about community here all the time, Jonathan. And like, this is the exact example of that. We have our guests just in the group, and regardless of whether they're responding or not, like, we have thousands of people. Now it's well over 4,000 people in here, and the conversation is fantastic. So this is a perfect example of why that group is so powerful.
So Danny says the first point that really struck him is inflation risk. When you're in drawdown, you don't get a paycheck tied to inflation anymore. So it's death by 1,000 cuts. I latched onto that just because accounting for inflation is something that you don't see talked about very much in the FI community. I'm not saying that there aren't people that have addressed it, but it doesn't get a lot of exposure. A lot of people just take the 4% rule at face value and just assume that if they have $1 million, they're going to live on $40,000 a year. I think it's a light bulb moment. It was a light bulb moment for me when I realized, wait a second, $40,000 a year right now isn't going to be the same as $40,000 20 years from now. And I think it's important that you recognize, how do you account for that in your drawdown strategy? And Fritz says, inflation scares the bejeepers out of me. And Brad, I was skeptical, but I actually went and looked it up, and you can find the word bejeepers on Urban Dictionary. So definitely go check that out if you're looking for some context. But he said we didn't get a chance to get into it much on the podcast, but it's one of our biggest concerns. My pension, which is a sizable amount of his retirement income, is not indexed for inflation. So it's definitely something he's thinking about. I do think that's one of the things that is interesting about the 4% rule, and maybe even the 4% rule of thumb. We did an episode about a month ago with Big Earn from Early Retirement Now. And in that episode and in the following roundup, he shared with us how he actually builds inflation into all of his calculations. And so that's one of the reasons that he thinks you need to be a little bit more conservative with what your number is, especially if you're trying to have capital preserved at the end of your drawdown period. And Big Earn has stated that's actually one of the reasons he's a little bit more conservative and he doesn't feel as comfortable using the 4% rule. I think he lands somewhere between 3.3 and 3.5, depending on whether or not Social Security is part of the picture, because he plans on adjusting that withdrawal rate to inflation each year.
Yeah, and that was a hopeful message for me from Big Earn's episode, which was inflation is already baked into the 4% rule, or in his case, 3.5%, I think he said is the ultimate safety. But even though conceptually most of us don't really think about inflation when we're doing just these back of the envelope, okay, I have $1 million, my 4% is 40,000, and that's just that. But the people who are actually thinking through this and really running the scenarios are baking inflation into this. So just keep that in mind, that when you hear someone like Earn, who has done these calculations in depth, talk about 3.5% plus or minus a little bit, depending on the situation, depending on what's going on, like he has baked that into it. So like this is not some calamitous thing that is going to destroy your entire retirement and nobody's thought about it. Okay, like that's kind of my summary is people much smarter than me are thinking about this and are baking it into the calculation. So like it's not an existential threat as far as I'm concerned.
And if you want to hear a little bit more information on the idea of how to adjust the 4% rule for inflation, we addressed that to some degree with Big Earn in episode 35. And then he also weighed in the Friday roundup that was attached to that episode, 35R. And we talk about how to adjust your withdrawal year to year based on inflation. So hopefully you'll find that helpful as well. Okay, next today, we want to spend a few minutes talking about this idea of delaying Social Security. So Danny also says mitigating inflation risk by deferring Social Security until age 70. It's a cheap longevity inflation insurance, but the break-even period is long, 22 years. If you're married, you may only want to do this for one of you. It's better for the women to do this than the men. And Fritz's feedback on that was that the Social Security delay is one of the strongest inflation hedges. In his mind, if you can get it to that higher base by delaying until the age of 70, then from there, the annual inflation adjustment is worth more in money on the same percentage higher base. It compounds. So to him, it's a great longevity insurance, the best he's got. I think we actually got some feedback on this one that was, and this is really good, was actually contesting this or was actually saying, I don't know if that's the right approach. It does depend on what your long-term strategy is. And I think the point that people were highlighting was the idea that it depends. Are you trying to preserve your assets? Like for instance, Social Security is a guaranteed amount. And even if you're making less, it prevents you from having to draw down on your other investment vehicles, like your 401k, like your taxable account. So if you can use your Social Security, which is guaranteed, even if it's a smaller amount, by not delaying that, by taking that early, you can leave all of those other accounts in place to a larger degree to continue to grow.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. And that also, again, comes down to math and ignoring the math or accepting the math. Like Fritz is clearly saying, in his opinion, that is a guaranteed return of whatever he said, 8% or somewhere in that vicinity. Like that makes sense to him math-wise. But as you're going through that feedback from the audience, I'm thinking to myself, okay, if my expenses are low enough, which they probably will be, that Social Security between myself and Laura can basically cover our entire yearly expenses, even at the earliest age to take it, I think I might just take it, right? Like that would then preserve all my other assets. So like that's an instance where maybe the math isn't quite as clear as what the personal decision comes down to for me. So like, again, this is the first time that I'm thinking about it. So please, kind of bear with me here. But that's kind of the cool aspect of this is like, we can all think through like how these things work for us. So I see the allure certainly of just taking Social Security as quickly as you can and maybe foregoing that 8% guaranteed return. But you know what? You're getting money to cover most, if not all, of your expenses if you are living this FI lifestyle. And that's pretty cool.
Now, what's really cool about this is Sun Wu, who is the moderator in our Facebook group. Now, he is a pure ultra optimizer in every way, shape, or form. And he writes over at 5by40.com. And he says, I completely disagree with the Social Security discussion on today's episode. Guaranteed 8% return by delaying Social Security. The problem with that argument is that the Social Security payout tables are actuarially fair. And what he means by that is when you take into account the lifespan of the average person will get the same lifetime payout regardless of when they start claiming benefits. The difference is going to lie with the widower benefits. So when someone dies his or her spouse is entitled to the deceased benefits. So if the higher earner is older, it's statistically better to delay taking Social Security benefits. So here's the back and forth of that. If you delay till 70, yes, Fritz is completely right. You're going to get that increase in payout year over year. So it's a guaranteed rate of return. But practically speaking, every single year you delay is a year less that you're probably going to get this, because most of us, Tim Ferriss aside, don't have 120, 130 years in the bank. Most of us are going to probably cap out right around 95 unless the robots take over our organs for us. So you could see how, yes, the math says you're going to get this guaranteed rate of return. But if now you're only able to use that for 10 years instead of for 16 or 17 years, Sun Wu is saying that may not be a great choice, with the exception of thinking about your surviving spouse. That is what you're going to have to weigh. And I don't think I can give you the one-size-fits-all answer in this episode, but I can say that when you're building your drawdown strategy, that is what I would be considering. Is your spouse significantly younger than you? Then there's a case that they would have a much longer timeline to be drawing down on that money for. And I think those are the key points you have to think about when determining what to do with this. And then the last point that we wanted to talk about from Danny was this idea of keeping money in your taxable account to cover the Roth conversion tax cost. Especially in a market downturn, you should get aggressive on the conversion. You will also need to fund living expenses as well. So I wanted to spend some time on this just because, Brad, I think some people do have a tendency to confuse the Roth conversion with the mega backdoor Roth. And I'd love to get your take on that.
Yeah, no, I think they absolutely do. And I think even for about 10 seconds in the episode with Fritz, I think you might have even confused it for just a second. But I know when we talk about this stuff, it all kind of comes fast and furious. So I know you understand it conceptually, but like if that can even happen to you, it can happen to anybody. So it's important to have the distinction between the Roth IRA conversion, which we've talked about it in the sphere of the Roth IRA conversion ladder, but mechanically it's just a Roth IRA conversion, which means you're taking money from a traditional pre-tax retirement account, like a 401k, or really it's going to happen from your IRA, and you're making a conversion. Okay, so that is actually a taxable event. You're taking money out of your pre-tax IRA and pulling it out and converting it to a Roth IRA. Now, since a Roth IRA is after tax money, you actually have to pay tax on that conversion. So let's say you pulled $30,000 out of your IRA, converted it to Roth. That $30,000 goes onto your tax return as taxable income. So even though you're putting 30 grand from your traditional into your Roth, and that money is just moving one to one, you actually do owe tax liability on that. So to Danny's point, like it's important to keep track of that. Like if you all of a sudden at tax time if you're at a 25% tax bracket, you have $7,500 worth of tax on that event. Now, hopefully most of us are not making that conversion if we're in that tax bracket. But again, you need to set aside that money for the tax liability on that conversion. So I think that is a crucial point, and it might help kind of make that distinction in your mind of what is mechanically happening with that Roth IRA conversion. So when Fritz was talking about in their first 2 years in retirement, they were going to live off their investments, which is in bucket 1 in his 3-bucket strategy. All right, they're going to live off of their just regular investments that they have sitting around, and they're going to convert as much as possible for the Roth IRA conversion. Now, that's the play there. Okay, so what he's going to do is his taxable income is going to be close to zero, right? Because he's in retirement. He has no income coming in. He hasn't started his pension, as we've discussed previously. So his income is zero. Now, this is like the millionaire educator's free money concept, right? Like Fritz and his wife on their tax return, they will have some amount of free money. And, I don't know Fritz's tax situation, dependents, things like that. So, I don't want to get into the exact amount, but let's say $25,000 of free money that he can convert from his traditional IRA to his Roth IRA each year and pay $0 of tax on it. All right. So that's the crucial point, is he's living off these investments. This is just a straight tax play because it's brilliant. Like he's created that taxable event, put it into his Roth, and now that money is tax-free forever. But he's essentially paid $0 in tax on this. So it is a brilliant, brilliant play. if that works into your plan, right? As it did for Fritz here. So I absolutely love that. And I really wanted to make a point of that this is the Roth IRA conversion that he's doing. And it really is a smart strategy.
And then I wanted to say that there is a distinct thing called the mega backdoor Roth. And I'm going to let Brad kind of introduce this concept as well. But before I do that, I wanted to talk about one point, which is in that episode, Fritz says that in order for you to be able to do this, your HR department has to allow in-service withdrawals. And the only reason I say that is I think some people took that as a mandatory requirement for HR departments. And I wanted to stress that unfortunately, it is not mandatory. He was saying that in order for you to be able to do it, your HR department will need to offer this. Now, they don't have to. They're under no requirement to. And in fact, many businesses don't. But if you're lucky enough to work for an employer whose HR department does allow in-service withdrawals, then you should be able to do this. And so it's worth going to your HR department to ask them whether or not they make that allowance.
Yeah, and that's built into the 401k plan. So it's not just like on the whim of like the VP of HR. It's what does your 401k plan allow? And yeah, the two keys to be able to do the mega backdoor, and I will explain that a little further in depth in a second, but the two keys are that they allow after-tax contributions and in-service withdrawals. Okay, so those are the two absolutely essential points. So when you do talk to your HR department and ask them about the rules of your particular 401k, those two things have to exist in order for this mega backdoor to work. All right. So just reading that Mad Scientist article, Jonathan, that you quoted in the Fritz episode, there are many people in the comments who were saying, "Oh, this sounds great in theory, but my company doesn't allow for it." I don't know what percent of companies do. 10, 20%, something like that. It didn't seem like a significantly large percentage, but that's just anecdotal, obviously. So the only way to know is to ask your HR department. It's as simple as that.
So I want to go ahead and start off this segment on the Mega Backdoor Roth by playing a voicemail that we got from Vishal. He has access to the Mega Backdoor Roth, and he is going to quickly take a few minutes and walk us through how it would work practically.
Hello, Jonathan and Brad. This is Vishal calling from Silicon Valley, California. I'm calling because I was happy to hear that in the latest episode, you guys talked about the Mega Roth, and I wanted to send a quick voicemail because I do it myself, regarding the steps involved in doing a Mega Roth. So the first thing to understand is that your 401k through your employer can have three kinds of contributions. One is the pre-tax, the other is your employer's matching, the third is after tax. And I'm talking about your traditional 401k. We are not talking about Roth 401k, which is a different beast. Now, among the three kinds of contributions, you might be already maximizing the $18,000 of pre-tax, which you're allowed to contribute. And your employer might be adding on another, 8K, 9K to it. So you're sitting on like 26, 27K. Let's go with 27K. But the 401k limit imposed by IRS is 54K per year. So there's room to contribute 27K more to this pie. And if you do that, and if you leave it in the 401k, it does not give you a lot of benefits. Number one, first, it's after tax money. Second, when you withdraw it in retirement, you have to pay taxes on the earnings. So it's not a great idea to leave the money in there. But there is this Mega Roth thing which you can do. And the way it works is you take what is called in-service distributions. It is similar to, let's say, when somebody's leaving a job, they can roll their 401k to some place like an IRA. In-service distribution is on similar lines. What you can do is you could take an in-service distribution. For example, my plan allows me to do it once every 12 months. So you take the in-service distribution and you put it in the Roth. And what I focus on is the after-tax 401k contributions. Let's say I contributed 27K in after-tax 401k. Since they only come from your paycheck, it's a good idea to do it around the time or withhold money from your paycheck around the time when you get a bonus or something, because what that helps you with is you're not growing the money in your 401k account. Because if you wait for a long time, money grows. And then after that, if you move it to Roth IRA, you have to first pay the taxes on the growth. Not first, but you have to do it in your tax return. So that's why it's better if you can, in a short interval of time, withhold that paycheck, lots of amount on the paycheck, and then eventually move it to Roth IRA via the in-service distribution. Not every company allows that. So not everyone has this ability to do this magic trick. But if your company's 401k allows you to do that, it's one of the greatest techniques because you could put in 27k in your Roth IRA while you're only allowed to do 5.5k in the Roth IRA. The earnings, as I said, if the money grew, it has to be taken with you. Again, if you put the earnings in the Roth, it gets taxed. If you put it in deductible IRA, then it won't be taxed because the earnings are still pre-tax, right? However, the problem with that is if you're familiar with backdoor Roth, the traditional backdoor Roth, like contributing 5,500 to a traditional IRA and then converting it to, Roth. If you leave your earnings in the deductible IRA, then while doing backdoor Roth, you might incur a taxable event. So I would advise just bite the bullet, take it to Roth, all of it to Roth, and this is how it works. In my company, I contribute about 75% of my paycheck to after tax. But again, it caps out at 54K. Thank you guys. If you have any questions, let me know. Bye-bye.
That was a very thorough walkthrough. And then just to our audience, for those of you that are interested in getting a little bit more of a tutorial on this, Vishal shared with us a post that he wrote specifically because we brought this up. He got a lot of value from the episode, but he really wanted to highlight that. And I think Mad Fientist did a pretty decent job talking about it, but I think there's definitely room for another article on the Mega Backdoor Roth. And so we're going to put a link to this in the show notes. Vishal writes over at everythingabouteducation.net. And this was a great walkthrough on how to tackle the Mega Backdoor Roth. I highly encourage you to check it out. It'll be in the show notes on today's episode. And before we move on, Brad, did you have any final thoughts on that? Anything else that we should clarify before we keep going?
Yeah, the Mega Backdoor, and this is kind of a bizarre thing, and we laughed about it on the episode because it seems like such a gimmicky loophole that like it's hard to even imagine this exists. It's just allowing you to put in some cases up to $35,000 in money into a Roth IRA each year, even if you're excluded normally based on income limitations from like a regular Roth IRA. So that's why it's called this backdoor Roth. So what's happening is you actually have a $53,000 limit. I think it's increased in 2017 to $54,000, but I know in 2016 it was definitely $53,000. So we'll go with that. And you can put in $18,000 of employee deferrals to your regular 401k. All right. And we always talk about you want to max that out, right? Because that's what lowers your tax liability. That's a tax deferred item. All right. So we highly recommend maxing that out. But the cool thing is you have that total $53,000 limit. So where we're getting the 35 is you just take the 53, back out the 18,000 that you put in, and that's $35,000. Okay. So that's the potential additional amount that you theoretically could contribute to your overall 401k. Now, what does include in that is your employer's contributions or matches or whatever. So that all gets added together up to this maximum $53,000 limit. But just for back of the envelope math, we'll say there's no employer match. You've put in 18,000. You still have that $35,000 limit. And now if you're fortunate enough to have a 401k at your company that does allow for after-tax contributions and in-service withdrawals, then you can put in up to that 35,000. You don't have to put in 35, obviously. Whatever you have extra lying around that you want to get into a Roth, you put that money in as an after-tax contribution, and then you have to actually mechanically make an in-service withdrawal, and that money then goes, as I understand it, it goes to a Roth IRA of your own. Okay, so that's hence the in-service withdrawal. You're actually withdrawing that money from that after-tax account in your company 401k into an actual Roth IRA account. All right, and it is as simple as that. That's the crazy part about this is why this exists, how this exists is beyond my comprehension, honestly, and I can't imagine this will last forever, but again, if you have those two things, you can do this. And then it is a Roth IRA forever. And it's tax-free forever, even when you pull it out 50 years from now. All right. So that's the beauty of this. And of course, since this is an after-tax contribution, that money is taxed currently. All right. It's just as if it was going to go into your regular savings account. You just decided to put it into this after tax contribution in the 401k and then do this in-service withdrawal to get it to turn it into a Roth IRA. So that's just a decision you're making, obviously, with the money you have left over. So that's why I say, like, it's not a slam dunk to put in $35,000 because then it's in your Roth IRA, right? So that's a decision you have to make, but mechanically, that's how this works. So Jonathan, does that all make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think between you and Vishal, I have a pretty good handle on it. I think next we need to start working on like a crowdsourced list of employers that actually allow this after-tax contributions and this in-service distributions. That would be an extremely valuable resource, and we could put it in the new ChooseFI Vault, which is where we're putting all of our resources. And by the way, guys, if you did not know that is live, you can just go to choosefi.com/vault and you can get access to the vault today. And it's got great content in there. It's got a loan amortization spreadsheet, PMI removal calculators. It's got resources from Big Earn over early retirement now. Retirement Manifesto shared his net worth template sheet. So very valuable resource. It'll continue to grow. Laura's actually put in 3 of the top 50 recipes. So that is can't miss content, and it is totally free. Definitely go check it out. choosefi.com/vault. You know, I actually think this is a great place for us to slow down and actually talk a little bit about the Roth. And I want to set this up by saying that Brad and I and most of the FI community are very pro pre-tax investment vehicles. And we prefer to start with those almost as a rule anytime possible. I would say that the traditional personal finance community, and I would say that Fritz to a large degree identifies with that, is much more pro Roth. And I think one of the things I'd like to do today is kind of figure out where is that point, because I think there is common ground there. I think that in the Dave Ramsey community, they just have a huge blind spot to the power of investing in pre-tax vehicles. I think that the FI community has done a great job of highlighting the value of potentially getting your money in pre-tax, growing tax-free, and then pulling out at a very low tax rate, or maybe at 0% tax, which obviously would be the best of all worlds. But I think there's going to be value today in maybe trying to pin myself down and maybe Brad down on where is that line at which the Roth is obviously too valuable to ignore. And I have a voicemail that I got from Zach that I'm going to go ahead and play now to set this up.
Hi guys, this is Zach. I'm just calling in. I had a question for you. I've been working my way through the podcast, but I'm only on episode 18 so far. So if somebody's already asked this, sorry. Great stuff, by the way. I've been self-educating on FIRE for a few years now, but my situation is a little different than the norm. Although my adjusted gross income is about $75K, I have a tax rate that's actually 0% or actually negative 0.3%. This is in large part due to the fact that I'm married, filing jointly, and we've got 4 kids. So not your average FIRE community member. Is it really worth me maxing out my traditional 401k when I don't pay taxes anyway? My research seems to tell me that I'd be better off maxing out the Roth 401k option instead. As this is all after tax, it seems like that would make it completely tax-free for the whole life of the investment. What do you guys think? Anyway, thanks. Keep up the good work.
My thoughts are he's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of hard to give blanket advice on a podcast to many, many tens of thousands of people when you don't know everybody's situation, right? So Zach clearly took the intelligent approach here and said, okay, well, that sounds like general advice that Brad and Jonathan are giving out on a regular basis and the FI community at large. That doesn't make sense for my life. And clearly, yeah, if you're already paying a 0% tax liability, then having tax deferred 401ks or IRAs to lower that tax liability does nothing. Obviously, there's no benefit whatsoever. So in his case, I would definitely max out the Roth 401k option, max out your Roth IRA if you can. Then that money is tax-free forever. It's locked in. You're locked in at 0% tax rate now, and it grows tax-free and can be pulled out tax-free forever. So to me, that is an absolute slam dunk. And I think, Jonathan, you set this up to kind of get our opinions on like where that line is. I'm not sure, again, that it's so great to give blanket advice, but I think people need to look at what is their marginal tax rate. And if you're in a 10 or even 15% marginal bracket, maybe that's a choice you make over whether I want to pay tax on that now, locked in at 10% or 15%, and then have it grow tax-free forever. It also depends on your life circumstances. If you have a side hustle that's making a lot of money, or you have a pension where you're going to have guaranteed income and your taxable income. So this is the play, right? Like the play theoretically that we always talk about, which is the beautiful FI scenario, is when you get to retirement, you have $0 of income. And then you can do all this fun stuff like pull out from your traditional IRAs and 401ks, which again are theoretically taxable events that go on your tax return. But because you do have some of that, quote, free money, right, with the standard deduction, personal exemptions, things like that, it would bring your tax liability down to zero on that, right? So like that's the beautiful play of why we suggest so strongly that you control what you can control and put money into these tax deferred items. And then boom, maybe on the other side of retirement, you can pull this out with zero tax, right? So that's the beautiful thing. But for some situations, that just doesn't work, right? Again, if you had a pension, if you had a side business that's making money, like you don't want to throw away a business, right? Because you want to do some funny FI hack. No, you have money coming in from a side hustle or a business or whatever it is. Obviously, you want to keep that going, but it then precludes some of these amazing FI hacks. And that's fine. But you need to look at your circumstances. So Zach said, all right, my circumstances are I pay $0 in tax liability already. Let me funnel as much as I can into Roth options, 401ks and IRAs. That's brilliant. That's how you should look at it.
Let's be realistic. Ultimately in our show, we can't shy away from giving blanket advice. To some degree, it's what we're here for. So let's try to, best we can, give some blanket advice, or at least give like a mental framework. Obviously, if you're at a 0% tax rate, yes, you want to go ahead and do all your post-tax contributions. You want to max out that Roth 401k. You want to max out the Roth IRA. Like that's an obvious play. But like you said, it gets a little bit more nuanced when you get into the 10 and 15% tax bracket. Fritz kind of pointed to this as well. He said, while you're in those lower marginal tax brackets, max the crap out of those Roth IRAs. And I began to think to myself, we have kind of skipped over that because we're so focused on this idea of all these optimization strategies we potentially have to pay nothing in tax. And by using these tools like the Roth conversion ladder, we can avoid paying even that 10% early withdrawal penalty. We have kind of bypassed some of these obvious tools that people have available to them. And so let's go ahead and take a few minutes and pigeonhole ourselves into committing to an answer on this. Let's make this into a hot seat. For our first scenario, let's tackle someone that has a $25,000 income. They're a single individual, so they just have your standard deduction, and they have 4 tools available to them. They have the 401k, the Roth 401k, they have the traditional IRA, and the Roth IRA. How would this individual tackle this problem?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. So they have $25,000 worth of gross income. And let's just kind of take a step back and look at like what their tax return would look like in its most simplistic form. So $25,000 of W-2 wages goes on there, and then they get to deduct, because the government gives everyone a standard deduction and a personal exemption. All right, so this is just a single person. Their standard deduction is $6,350. The personal exemption is $4,050 for a total of $10,400. All right, so that just gets deducted straight off the top, and it leaves them with taxable income of $14,600. All right, so that's what you then go to the tax brackets and see, how much tax am I going to pay? What marginal tax bracket am I in? Which means, what is that last dollar or the next dollar of taxable income going to be taxed at? What tax rate? So I'm looking at the 2017 tax brackets, and for single individuals, the 10% bracket goes up to $9,325. All right, so of this person's $14,600 of taxable income, $9,325 of it is being taxed at 10%. And now the remaining $5,275 is taxed at the 15% rate. So how I would approach this conceptually is, okay, 15%, I want to make contributions to my 401k to lower my taxable income to get me out of that 15% rate. So now none of my dollars of income are being taxed at 15%. So what this person would have to do is, if they made contributions of $5,275 into their 401k. It would lower their taxable income down to $9,325, which is the exact upper limit for the 10% tax rate. All right. So now they've lowered their gross income from 25,000 all the way down to 93.25. And now every single dollar of their taxable income is taxed at a 10% federal rate. All right. So we're talking about federal taxes here, obviously. Now they have a decision to make going forward, which is every subsequent dollar that they put into a 401k or a traditional IRA is now only worth 10% in ultimate tax benefits in the current year. Right. So now they have a decision. And I'm not so sure that I would continue putting in a tax deferred item. I might put into a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k at that point. Now that's a decision, of course, they have to make, but at least it sets up for you, the audience, the conceptual framework of what we're working with here, right? So you have to look at those tax brackets. You need to see where you fit into them. And then, like Fritz said, you need to make that decision on what makes sense for you based on your personal situation and your tax bracket.
And I think the framework that Brad just laid out is what that decision tree actually looks like. Specifically, you want to focus on the fact that your 401k is a vehicle to allow you to navigate some of these marginal tax brackets and make some of these other tools that you have available a little bit more appealing. And I think for both of us in our mind, once you can get down to that 10% marginal tax bracket, at that point, the Roth IRA looks very appealing, especially since now you don't have to jump through any hoops dealing with Roth conversion ladders. All that stuff goes out the window. You're already able to get that directly into the Roth. Yes, you're paying the 10% up front, but that 10% tax rate seems like a very appealing fixed rate to know that you're paying and then to never have to pay tax on that again. I think that's just kind of a comprehensive way of looking at it. Once you can get into that 10% marginal tax bracket, sure, yeah, there may be a way down the road if you're willing to frame your life in a certain way that you could pay $0 in tax, and obviously that's appealing. But 10% is a pretty reasonable rate to never have to pay money on the growth and to never have to pay money in taxes on the 20 or 30 year outcome of whatever that ends up growing to.
Yeah, I agree completely. And in fairness, the 10% bracket is very small. As we're saying, it's $9,300 for single individuals. For married filing joint, it's double that. It's $18,650. So that's a somewhat difficult needle to thread there. But that said, you might expand that choice for yourself to the 15% bracket. That is your personal preference over what you can control. So, okay, then the question becomes, if you could pay 15% and lock it in forever, would you pay that? Some people might, right? So it depends on your facts and circumstances of what your retirement's going to look like, how many of these FI hacks you'll be able to take advantage of, and things like that. Like, there are different considerations, but I think the 10% to me is an absolute slam dunk. 15%, you might consider doing the Roth IRA and 401k as well, or some combination thereof. Like, at least there's a decision point for me. But unquestionably, in my eyes, I would personally lock in the 10% if I could.
All right, now let's go ahead and stretch this out for the sake of completeness, and let's take a look at the single individual making $60,000 a year with the opportunities for the same vehicles that we just discussed.
All right, yeah. So again, very simplistic. We'll take 60,000. We will lop off the standard deduction and the personal exemption of $10,400, and they are down to a taxable income of $49,600. Okay. Now, if you look at the tax bracket for single individuals, the 25% bracket actually starts at $37,951. So this person is actually in the 25% bracket, and the last $11,650 of their income is being taxed at 25%. So if they put $11,650 into their 401k or traditional IRA, that is all being taxed at 25%. But if they did make those contributions, that would come off their taxable income on their tax return, and it would lower them down to actually jumping all the way down to the 15% bracket. So that is an amazingly valuable contribution, right? You're making $11,650 into your 401k, and all of your remaining taxable income is being taxed at either the 10% bracket for the first 9325 or 15% for the remaining roughly $28,000. So that is an ultra valuable contribution to a 401k to get yourself out of that 25% bracket for any one of your dollars. I mean, that's really pretty cool. And again, this is why you kind of just take a quick look at this. I know a lot of people kind of shy away from understanding taxes and looking at these brackets, but like when we're in the FI community, like you need to understand this at least at a conceptual level. So I hope that this conversation is really hitting home to you. These are the considerations. So now this person, once they've made those contributions, they're in the 15% bracket. And then they've got a decision to make on what they want to do. Do they want to max out the remaining 401k amounts that they have up to $18,000? So an additional $6,350? That's possible. But, they're getting 15% in value for that in the current year. Maybe they want to put some in a Roth IRA. Maybe they're just have a 80% savings rate. Maybe they live at home and they want to do both, right? Like that's a consideration as well. So again, you need to look into the situation and figure out what works for you, but you need this information. You need to just Google something as simple as 2017 tax brackets. That's literally what I did for this exercise. And I'm looking at the tax brackets right now, and it's really, really simple. So this is just important background information. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this exercise.
And my takeaways on that are that the 25% is a no-brainer for tax deferred. I think you will always be able to find creative ways to do this once you're in the FI community. When you're in the 25% marginal tax bracket, see what you can do to get that income into a tax deferred, tax advantage vehicle when possible. If you're down in the 15, obviously you are hearing me and Brad hem and haw a little bit about it, which means that there's probably not a wrong answer. Instead, focus on your savings rate and figure out how you can get as much as possible into that. Don't lose tons of sleep trying to figure it out. Try to do both, right? Max out that 401k as early as possible. Just the fact that you're at the point where you're maxing out the 401k and you're thinking about what else you can do on $60,000 a year, you're going to do great. And then either way that you go down the road, you're going to have a play because you're in our community. There are tools that you can use to just totally crush this game. So just feel good about that. I'm trying to pin myself down because I like to force myself into this uncomfortable situation of having to make the choice. And I don't want to just say, well, these are what your options are. Do what you want to do. And I want to put Brad on the spot, and I'll commit to an answer as well. Brad, you're in this second bracket. You're making $60,000 a year. You make the decision to max out your 401k. So you fill that bucket up. $18,000 goes in your tax deferred. It gets you out of the 25% marginal tax bracket. Now you're sitting in the 15 and you have a choice, Roth IRA or traditional IRA. Where are you going to put that extra $5,500? Now, realizing with the context of you're going to be fine either way, which one do you do?
Wow. I'm sitting here cringing. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I know the answer. I probably would do Roth in that case.
Gosh, I'm cringing too. Brad, I might lean towards the traditional IRA because there's some other variables with taking the hit on the Roth early on, and that is your state tax. Now, this is where individual circumstances and facts on the ground come into play. But I know in Virginia, it would be at least an additional 5 or 6% in state tax. And because you're not going to be itemizing at this point, you're just taking the standard deduction, you're going to take that hit as well. So I think I would be tempted into just doing the traditional IRA just to avoid that extra state tax, which practically speaking would put that tax rate at right around 20%. So I think I would lean towards the traditional IRA.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, it's funny because as I was sitting here kind of cringing through my answer because I'm not sure what it would be. It really is that close. Is that I was thinking about how kind of we're setting up a simplistic example, obviously just for federal. Because it's just easier and it makes more sense conceptually for people. But yeah, that does factor into it. Is you're really adding your federal and your state tax liabilities. So in this case, right, for Virginia, it would amount to somewhere between, I think, 20 or 21%. But if you lived in a higher tax state, it could be up to 24, 25%. So that's a different decision, right? Like if you lived in a no income tax state, then it's only 15%. So again, it really does come down to individual facts and circumstances. So that does make it a tough thing to say blanketly on a podcast of what I would answer. But yeah, I think I probably would go with the Roth, but I would be very tempted by that traditional or putting more into a 401k.
And the other thing you'd have to look at really to round that out when you're making your choice, depending on where you live and the state that you're in, some states have thresholds for where those tax brackets actually start. So going back to our first case study where the person was making $25,000 a year, they could, by funding that 401k, they could potentially drop themselves below that threshold, in which case they would only be subject to just that federal tax. And so it's a very, very obvious play. Well, I hope you found that helpful, especially having me and Brad squirm our way through that hot seat question there at the end. In my mind, this episode accomplished 3 or 4 different things. One, for those of you that were trying to figure out how the mega backdoor Roth worked, practically speaking, this should lay the groundwork for that. It should be a great reference for you going forward. 2, so for the parents that are trying to help their children tease out whether or not that first investment vehicle should be a 401k, and then whether or not they should be then putting money into a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA, this episode should clarify that decision. 3, for that single path to FI or for that first job, those early years, this should clarify how to approach those early investment strategies. Very comprehensive, probably going to be an episode you're going to need to listen to a few times. And I think it's just an extremely valuable conversation that kind of gets glossed over because Brad and I find ourselves talking many times about the married couple with one child that's 10 years or 15 years into their journey. So hopefully for those of you that are in this season of life, you'll find this a very useful episode. We like to close every show by doing a giveaway for a book that we have found useful. And traditionally we do J.L. Collins' book, The Simple Path to Wealth, and we do Dominic Cortuccio's book, Design Your Future. This will be the last week we're doing it, and then we actually are going to be featuring a new book. But for one more week, we're also doing Tim Ferriss's book, Tools of Titans. And that's one that both Brad and myself have read and found extremely useful. And it's just the tactics, routines of millionaires, billionaires, and high performers. And I think it's one that both of us have found extremely useful and insightful, and we just wanted to share it with our audience. So if you're interested in that and you want to participate in this giveaway, all you have to do, just go to choosefi.com/iTunes, follow the instructions there, leave us a short written review, and then send us an email to feedback@choosefi.com, letting us know that you left the review and what screen name you left it under, and we'll enter you in the drawing. We give away 1 book for every 5 written reviews that we get, and we would love to include you in that. All right, Brad, how many winners do we have today?
All right, today we have 2. And the first winner is Steven, and he called this literally life-changing. Discovered this podcast a few months ago, and I've been hooked ever since. I am now disappointingly all caught up, so I have to wait for the new episodes. But it gives me more time to continue making the changes that will benefit my family's lives in the future, as recommended by Jonathan and Brad. Accounts have been moved to Vanguard, savings have been made on car insurance, groceries, and gas. Best of all, we are using travel rewards. So now I see a chance for our family of 5 to visit the relatives in the UK thanks to credit card rewards. And for that, I will be forever grateful. Please don't stop. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. I have no plan to stop, and I will make sure that Brad doesn't get the opportunity to consider the possibility. But for those of you that are thinking, how do I travel to the UK with my family using just travel rewards? Definitely go check out episode 9, which is kind of our pillar post on how to really discovered the world of travel rewards and how to travel the world at very low cost. It's something that we've been doing in the FI community for a while now, and you won't hear about this talked on the Dave Ramsey Show. So definitely go check that out if you're interested. I'm pretty sure if you haven't heard of it before, it will blow your mind.
Yeah, I totally agree. And all right, Jonathan, our second winner is Priya.
And Priya says, changing the world. Brad and Jonathan are just phenomenal. The best part of the podcast series is a change in the way we think about collecting skills. I look forward to the podcast every week, and the content is varied. They keep crushing it every week, and that inspires me to crush it at work week after week. Having this online community to help with both the strategic and the tactical approaches to financial prowess is fantastic. Can't wait to read The Simple Path to Wealth. Well, we will get that on out to you. Thank you so much, Priya, for being a part of the show today. And thank you to our community for joining us. One quick favor, if you enjoyed the podcast today, if you got value from this episode, please just take a second and press the subscribe button. It tells the algorithms and the platforms that you're listening to this on that you get value from this show. And as a result, we're able to continue to get you guys these higher profile guests. And we're very grateful that you're here. And we'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to Choose FI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.